Hello, friends. Tonight we're going to do something a little different. Just for a moment, I want you to picture the screen you're looking at. Think of the millions of colors it can display. Think of the last time you scrolled through an online store. The t-shirts, the sneakers, the phone cases, all forming an endless rainbow, available for next-day delivery. Color is now cheap. It's everywhere, and it's easy to forget. But we are about to begin a journey back to a time when a single patch of vibrant color could be worth more than the land it was made on. A time when most of humanity lived in a world of browns, grays, and murky off-whites. Honestly, for our modern, visually stimulated brains, you probably wouldn't last a week without going mad from all the quiet sameness. So before you settle in and unwind, please take a brief moment to like and subscribe, but only if you're truly enjoying what we do here. It's a small click for you, but for me, it makes a world of difference to the channel. And if you have a moment, I'd love to know where and when you're watching this from. Just leave your city and the time in the comments below. It's always so wonderful to see how our small community is spread all across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a small fan for some gentle background sound, and let's drift into our journey for tonight. The first thing you notice isn't a sight, but a smell. It's the scent of damp earth, of wood smoke, of unwashed wool and baking bread, all mingling in the cool morning air. You pull your coarse, undyed tunic a little closer. It's a pale, unassuming gray, the natural color of the flax it was woven from. You feel the grit of the road beneath your simple leather sandals as you step into the flow of people in the marketplace. This is where the world comes to trade, to gossip, to live. But as you look around, your modern eyes start searching for something that isn't there. Color. It's not that the world is black and white, not at all. It's just muted, as if someone has turned the saturation way down. The stalls are made of raw, weathered wood. The pottery is mostly simple, reddish-brown terracotta and plain gray clay. Most of the people passing you wear the same palette as you do: cream, beige, brown, and the occasional murky blue-gray. It's the palette of an indie film director going through an extreme minimalist phase, a world defined not by the colors it has, but by the ones it lacks. You see a vegetable cellar, a few green herbs, a pale orange root, and you feel a small wave of relief in the sea of neutrals. You realize this was the default state for most of human history. Color was a luxury that very few could even imagine. To make a lasting color, you couldn't just crush a flower petal. That would fade in hours. You needed a dye, a pigment, something that would bind to the fabric or wood and defy the sun. And those substances were rare, often difficult to process and fiercely guarded. And then you see it. A ripple of movement cuts through the crowd. A local official, flanked by two guards, is making his way through the market. He is a man of status. You can tell by his confident stride and the way others part for him. But it's his clothing that makes you stop. His tunic is the same off-white linen as everyone else's, but along the hem is a stripe of deep, rich, heavy crimson. It isn't just red, it's a statement, a declaration of power so loud, it's like a trumpet blast. It is the ancient equivalent of parking a Ferrari in the village square. People don't just look at him, they see the color. They understand what it represents: wealth beyond imagining, access to trade routes that stretched thousands of miles, a status so secure it could be worn casually. Spilling wine on that hem could cost more financially than most villagers' dowries. You notice a woman nearby, a weaver, looking at the official's tunic with a professional's mix of awe and curiosity. She, more than anyone, understands the work behind that color. She might spend her days working with woad, a common plant that, through a foul-smelling and laborious fermentation process, produces a somewhat blotchy pale blue. Historians still debate whether woad was the color of the working class or a rising middle class, but her blue, the result of a year's hard work, is a pale sky next to the blood-red sunset on the official's robe. You'd later learn that her village's entire economy is based on another plant, weld, which produces a pleasant but unremarkable yellow. That was the reality, a kind of geographic lottery. The plants that grew in your soil determined the colors of your world. To create truly vibrant, lasting color was an act of chemistry, botany, and often pure luck. And those who unlocked those secrets became not just dyers. They became power brokers, artists, and keepers of beauty in a world desperate for it. You pull your own beige tunic a little closer, feeling a new appreciation for its rustic, honest texture, but your eyes remain fixed on that receding band of crimson, an impossibly luxurious speck in a vast, muted world.
The deep crimson stain on the official's robe lingered in your mind, a small, burning ember as you walked away from the central market. You felt a pull, a curiosity about where such a color could come from. It was clearly not grown in a field like the pale yellow weld or the light blue woad. It felt different, more substantial. Your feet, as if with a will of their own, carried you away from the smells of bread and livestock and toward the sharp, salty tang of the nearby harbor. The city's narrow, winding streets were a labyrinth, but you followed the growing chorus of seagulls and the faint sound of waves gently lapping against distant stone. And then you began to smell it. At first, it was just a faint, unpleasant note, hidden beneath the familiar scents of the sea. You wrinkled your nose. It was a sharp, metallic smell, with a heavy undertone of something decaying. You tried to place it. It wasn't the simple, honest smell of fish being gutted on the docks. This was something far more industrial, far more potent. As you drew closer to a heavily walled and guarded section of the port, the odor became overwhelming, a direct assault on the senses. It was the kind of smell that might make a modern-day food safety inspector see their entire career flash before their eyes. Imagine a forgotten corner of a seafood market after a 3-day power outage in the middle of a heat wave, and then add a splash of ammonia just to make things interesting. To put it mildly, it was the smell of death. And yet, strangely, people were working here, diligently. Guards stood at the gates, their faces impassive, seemingly immune to the foul air. You could catch glimpses of workers inside, their tunics stained with ugly, dark blotches. Drawn by a morbid curiosity you couldn't quite explain, you found a vantage point where a crumbling section of wall allowed you to peer into this forbidden zone. What you saw at first was confusing. Huge stone vats, some holding a murky, yellowish liquid, and next to them, mountains, literal mountains of tiny crushed shells, millions upon millions of them, bleached white by the sun, crunching under the feet of the laborers. It took a moment for your brain to process the scene. This entire industrial operation, this horrific stench, all centered around a tiny sea snail. You had stumbled upon the source of royalty. This was where Tyrian purple was born. A weathered old sailor, noticing your look of fascinated horror, leaned against a nearby wall and muttered. He told you that this was the work of the Phoenicians, masters of the sea. Their city of Tyre, just to the north, had built an empire on the back of this stinking mollusk. He pointed to the shell piles. You were looking at the remains of the Bolinus brandaris, a predatory sea snail. To get the dye, he explained, you couldn't just crush them. No, that would be too simple. You had to extract a single, tiny gland, the hypobranchial gland, to be exact, while the snail was still alive or just after it had died. Each gland yields just one drop of a clear, mucus-like fluid. He then told you a legend. Historians still debate the true origin of the process, but the storytellers of the port preferred a more mythic tale. It was said that the great hero Heracles was walking on the beach with his beloved nymph Tyrus. His dog, ever curious, chewed on a snail washed up on the shore, and when it returned, its mouth was stained a brilliant, beautiful purple. Tyrus, captivated by the color, refused to be with Heracles until he could bring her a gown of the same hue. And so the hero, in his quest to win her heart, gathered thousands of the snails and created the world's first purple dye. A fine story, the old sailor scoffed, much finer than the foul reality before you. The truth was that the numbers were staggering. He told you it took some 12,000 snails to create just 1.5 grams of pure dye, barely enough to trim the border of a single toga. It was an almost comical level of inefficiency. It made your shade-grown, fair-trade organic cup of coffee look like a mass-produced commodity. You watched as the workers meticulously extracted the tiny glands and dropped them into vats of salt water. These vats would then be left in the sun for days. The clear liquid, through the heat of the sun and a process of photochemical reaction, would slowly, as if by magic, transform. It moved through a rather unpleasant spectrum of colors, from a milky yellow to a swampy green, then a dull blue, before finally, miraculously, deepening into the rich, deep purple, the color of kings, born from vats of decaying snail mucus. You realize now that the crimson on the official's robe was likely a cheaper, though still precious, version of this color. The true purple, Tyrian purple, was reserved for gods, emperors, and those so wealthy they could afford to wear a fortune. And its secret was more closely guarded than a military fortress.
Like smile flickering across his sun-parched, sea-salted lips. He seems to be enjoying your quiet, astonished reaction. To hear of it is one thing, he rasps, his voice like the sound of seashells crumbling underfoot. But to see the kitchen where the meal is cooked, that's another. He inclines his chin toward another part of the complex, where the activity seems more hurried and organized. He doesn't lead you through the main gate, but instead turns along the outer wall to a spot where the barrier is lower,
erected not for true defense, but merely to deter curious eyes. From here, you can observe the entire production line, a symphony of decaying, steady, and calculated labor. The journey into the heart of purple begins not in a dye vat, but out at sea. You see small boats returning to shore, their gonwales low with wicker baskets brimming with the day's catch. Men, their skin tanned to look like old leather, carry the baskets onto the beach. This is not fishing for sustenance. This is an industrial-scale harvest. What overwhelms you is the sheer quantity. Basket after basket spilling onto a mound of living snails that could number in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. They are prisoners of war, captured to yield their most precious fluid for the vanity of an empire. The next stage is where a percussive, unending clacking echoes through the air. You see rows of people, mostly women and young boys, sitting on low stools. Each has a small stone anvil and a hammer-like tool. Their work is simple, repetitive, and requires a curious combination of brute force and delicate finesse. They are the snail shell crackers. They cannot smash the snail. That would destroy the tiny gland within. They must strike in just the right spot, with just enough force to expose the gland without shattering it. You watch a woman's hands, a blur of motion, a practiced dance. Pop. A small incision reveals the tiny, pale yellow glob of slime. Gland into the lead pot. Broken shell onto the discard pile behind them. Pop. Incision. Discard. Repeat. 1,000 times a day. You can't help but think this must have been the worst entry-level job in the ancient world. The job listing would read something like, snail gland extractor, no experience necessary, must be able to tolerate repetitive tasks and seafood-related calamities. Once the lead pots are full, they are moved to the enormous stone vats you observed earlier. This is where the real magic begins, a formula kept more secret than national treasure. The old sailor explains that the glands are mixed with a precise amount of sea salt and left to steep for 3 days. Afterward, the mixture is gently boiled in the lead-lined vats. He calls it simmering. He says the master dyer can tell the temperature just by looking at the steam. Too hot, the precious molecules are destroyed, the color lost forever. Too cold, the reaction will never complete. It's like a secret family barbecue sauce recipe. But instead of a pinch of paprika, the secret is 10 days of simmering snail guts under a relentless, unyielding sun. Then the old sailor points to a vat where a craftsman is preparing to dye a skein of wool. Here, he whispers, is the miracle. The vat contains no purple liquid at all. The mixture inside is a murky, greenish yellow and smells even worse up close. You watch as the clean, cream-colored skein of wool is lowered into the malodorous cauldron. It soaks for a duration determined only by the master dyer's intuition. When the craftsman pulls it out, your first reaction is disappointment. The skein is now a muddy, yellow-green, as if it has just been dredged from a swamp. But then, as it meets the air and light, the magic begins. Right before your eyes, the color begins to bloom. From yellow-green to pale blue, then sky blue, then deep indigo, and finally, like a flower opening in time-lapse, it settles into the most vibrant and profound and stable shade of purple you have ever seen. It's the world's first, most expensive Photoshop filter, working live before your eyes. It's not an overlay. The color is now part of the very fiber, thanks to a chemical reaction. This is why the dye is so durable, the sailor explains. It is a vat dye, bonding with the fabric through oxidation. Historians still debate whether the dyers of that era truly understood the chemical oxidation they were performing. Perhaps to them, it was not science, but a form of divine magic, a gift from the sea god Melkart bestowed upon the city of Tyre. You stand there, mesmerized, watching the craftsman rinse the magnificent purple skein, now worth more than gold. You look at that perfect skein, then back at the towering piles of discarded snail shells. You do a grim mental calculation. All this effort, all this stench, all this labor, just to make one skein of thread. To dye enough fabric for an emperor's toga, it would likely take months. It would require a fleet of boats, an army of laborers, and the sacrifice of millions of snails. It wasn't just clothing, it was a monument.
The image of that perfect roll of purple wool, so rich in color and value, seems to imprint itself on your mind. The smell of the sea and the dyeing vats begins to fade, replaced by something else. The air becomes warmer and drier. The crunch of shells underfoot gives way to the steady, soft slap of sandals on sun-warmed stone. When you open your eyes, you are no longer on the shores of Phoenicia. You are in the heart of the beast, the center of the world, Rome. You find yourself walking through the Roman Forum, a sprawling valley of shimmering marble temples, towering basilicas, and countless statues honoring stern-faced men. The sound of the place is overwhelming, a gentle chaos of merchants calling out their wares, politicians addressing indifferent crowds, the grinding of wagon wheels on stone, and dozens of languages spoken at once. This is a place of pure, naked power. And yet, amidst all the wealth and marble, the ground is surprisingly plain. The sea of people is a familiar wave of off-white, beige, and brown togas. Wealth here is shown in the fineness of the fabric, the quality of the leather sandals, or the glint of a gold ring on a man's finger. But the ultimate statement, purple, is almost entirely absent. Its absence speaks louder than its presence ever could. Then you see him, a senator, moving through the crowd with an air of ease and authority. He is the living embodiment of the Roman ideal, calm, proud, and draped in a toga of the most beautiful, pure white wool. But it is the border that catches your eye. Running in a straight line along the edge is a deep, wide stripe of purple, the latus clavus. This is not mere decoration. It is a state-issued ID, a wearable declaration of rank, fashion that is legally binding. To wear that purple stripe was to announce to the world that you belonged to the senatorial class, the rulers of the known world. It was a privilege of birth and status, and the law, the lex sumptuaria, was perfectly clear on this. You notice a wealthy merchant pass by the senator. His garment is brilliant white, woven from the finest wool money could buy. But there is absolutely no trace of purple. To add even a thin purple border would be unthinkable, like wearing a clown's costume to an exclusive gala. Ridicule would be the least of it. Fines and social ruin would follow swiftly. This is not fashion. It is the strict, color-coded language of power. A little further on, you see a group of young boys, not yet in their teens, being led by their tutor. They are noisy and energetic, yet they too bear the mark of their class. Their togas, the toga praetexta, have a narrower purple border. It signifies that they are the free-born sons of the elite, future citizens and potential leaders. That purple was a talisman, a symbol of their innocence and their station, reminding all that powerful families stood behind them. You realize then, purple was not just for those who held power. It was a mark you carried from childhood, a constant reminder of your place in Rome's rigid hierarchy. Historians still debate how strictly these rules applied to wealthy women. While men were bound by the rigid codes of the toga, some evidence from frescoes and texts suggests that the wives and daughters of the elite had a bit more flexibility. You might see a wealthy matron in a palla of a lighter lavender or mauve. Expensive, certainly, but not the deeply political, saturated Tyrian purple. It was a delicate balance, displaying wealth without directly challenging the masculine symbols of state power. But there is another level, one that is in a class of its own. You see a colossal triumphal arch, its side carved with a relief depicting a general celebrating a great victory. In the carving, he wears the legendary toga picta, a garment woven entirely from Tyrian purple and embroidered with pure gold thread. This was the attire reserved for a triumphal parade, the most important religious ceremonies, and later for the emperor alone. This was no longer the garment of a man, but of a living god. To wear it was to be elevated above all other mortals. And it is here that the fashion laws became lethal. During the Republic, a general could wear the toga picta for a single day, a temporary honor. But as the Republic crumbled and the emperors rose, they claimed purple for themselves. Men like Julius Caesar famously bent the rules, wearing his purple-bordered toga in a way that clearly signaled his ambition. Later, emperors like Nero and Caligula made it official. Pure purple was for them alone. For any other man to appear in public in a solid purple garment was no longer a social mistake. It was an act of treason. It was a silent declaration that you considered yourself an equal or perhaps a replacement for the emperor. The penalty for such a stunning act of fashion rebellion was not a fine or exile. It was death, swift and non-negotiable. You look back at the senator with his simple purple stripe, and you understand that color was woven not just with wool, but with law, ambition, and the ever-present threat of violence.
The image of the condemned man, his only crime of fatal fashion choice, begins to dissolve. The brilliant, sun-bleached marble of the Roman Forum softens, its sharp edges blurring into a golden haze. The cacophony of spoken Latin fades, giving way to the melodic, resonant tones of Greek and the gentle scent of incense that now perfumes the air. Centuries pass in the blink of an eye. You are still in the heart of the Roman Empire, but it now has a new name, Byzantium, and its capital, Constantinople, is now the richest, most magnificent city on earth.
You find yourself near the entrance to the Great Palace, a sprawling complex of halls, chapels, and gardens. The obsession with purple did not fade with the fall of the Western Roman Empire. In fact, it only grew more intense, more profound. Here in the Eastern Empire, Tyrian purple, now called royal purple, was the absolute and undisputed symbol of the emperor's divine right to rule. It was not just a color, it was the state's official brand identity. The sheer single-mindedness of the Byzantine color palette is something that would make any modern corporate marketing department weep with envy. You witness an imperial decree being posted. It is written on the finest vellum, and the ink itself is a shade of light purple. Royal documents were literally steeped in the color. A high-ranking court official walks by. His soft leather slippers are dyed an unmistakable deep purple. This was a privilege reserved for the emperor alone, a subtle reminder that even the ground he walked upon was sacred. But the Byzantines took the obsession even further, creating a concept so audacious it feels like something from mythology. Your guide, a low-ranking, reverent scribe, ushers you into a special, heavily guarded room within the palace. The room is not large, but it is stunning. It is not decorated with paint or fabric, but lined entirely with polished slabs of dark purple porphyry stone. This is the porphyry chamber. It was here, the scribe explains, that the empresses came to give birth. To be born in this room, surrounded by imperial purple, was to be a porphyrogenitos, born in the purple. It was the ultimate symbol of status, an undeniable stamp of divine destiny on your claim to the throne. It meant your right to rule was not just won through conquest or politics. It was innate, designated by God, and declared by the very color of your birthing room. For centuries, the Byzantine state maintained a strict monopoly on the production of royal purple. The dye workshops, now located in Constantinople, were a top state secret. Their products were reserved exclusively for the court and for the most supreme diplomatic gifts. But as you look closer, cracks begin to appear in this magnificent facade. The empire is old. Its borders are shrinking. The stable trade routes that once brought a plentiful supply of Bolinus brandaris snails from the coasts of Tyre and Sidon are now perilous, controlled by rival powers. The once reliable supply of snails was beginning to dry up. Even the knowledge itself was becoming fragile. The complex, multi-step process you witnessed centuries ago was always passed down orally, in secret, from master dyer to apprentice. It was never written down, for fear the secret could be stolen. Historians still debate the exact reasons for this lack of documentation. Perhaps it was the secretive, guild-like nature of the craft. Or perhaps the Byzantine elite, in their absolute arrogance, simply could not imagine a world where their eternal empire and its signature color would ever cease to exist. That world arrived. The year is 1453. The city is under siege. The ground trembles with the constant boom of massive cannons, a terrifying new technology brought by Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire. The air is thick with smoke and fear. Inside the walls, the last emperor, Constantine XI Palaiologus, gathers his remaining men, and on the final day, As the city fell, he cast off his imperial regalia and fought and died as a common soldier. It is said that after the battle, his body was recognized in the heaps of the slain by a single small detail. He was still wearing his purple slippers. In the chaos and fire of the conquest, the imperial dye workshops were destroyed or abandoned. The few elderly artisans who held 2,000 years of secrets in their memory were scattered, killed, or simply left with no state to serve. The supply chain was broken. The institutional knowledge was lost. The secret to making true Tyrian purple, a process that was incredibly complex, resource-intensive, and famously smelly, was gone completely. It was a system failure of the highest order, with no cloud backup. The new rulers, the Ottomans, had their own color traditions, favoring vibrant reds, greens, and blues. The most legendary color in the world, the color of gods and emperors, a symbol of power so potent it was worth dying for, was now little more than a footnote in the history books, its true shade remaining an alluring mystery to historians for centuries.
The ghost of the last emperor, identified only by his purple slippers, lingers in your mind. For over 2,000 years, a single color, born from the sea, had symbolized the absolute height of power. Now it was gone. The secret was lost, the workshops were ruins, and the world now held a void, a vacancy on the throne for the most precious color on earth. Nature, like human ambition, abhors a vacuum. And so the search for a successor began. The crown of most precious would pass not from a sea creature, but from a stone, born in the highest and harshest mountains in the world. Your journey begins again, not with the scent of salt, but with the thin, biting cold of the air. You find yourself thousands of miles from the Mediterranean, in a place that feels like the roof of the world. These are the Sari Song mines, deep in a remote and treacherous valley in what is now modern Afghanistan. For centuries, this was the only known source of this particular treasure in the entire world. Just reaching this place was an ordeal, a journey across perilous mountain passes and through lands controlled by notorious tribes. You join a group of miners, their faces weathered into masks by the harsh sun and wind. Their method is ancient and brutal. They build enormous bonfires against the cliff face, heating the rock until it nearly glows. Then they douse it with cold water. The sudden thermal shock cracks the stone, a dangerous and unpredictable process. You watch as they work deep in man-made caverns, their only light coming from flickering oil lamps. They are searching for a specific vein, a thread of celestial blue hidden in the mountain's heart. And then they find it. A miner gives a cry of triumph, and the others gather around. He holds up a dull, grayish rock, unremarkable at first glance. But then he strikes it with a hammer, and from it a universe emerges. A blue so deep, so pure and profound, it seems to drink the light around it. It is the color of the twilight sky, just as the first stars begin to appear. And scattered throughout the blue are tiny glittering flecks of golden pyrite, like a dusting of distant constellations. You are holding raw lapis lazuli. It is not just a stone, it is a solid piece of the night sky. The stone's journey has only just begun. You now travel with a caravan, a slow-moving river of camels and pack mules,
tasked with bringing the precious blue stones out of the mountains. The lapis is guarded more closely than any passenger. Its security is tighter than a pop star on tour. And this rock, after all, was arguably more famous. You travel for weeks across arid, rocky landscapes, following the treacherous route that would one day be known as the Silk Road. You face scorching days, freezing nights, and the unspoken threat of bandits, men who would kill for a sack of blue rocks. You stop in oasis towns, vibrant hubs of commerce, where the caravan leader, a shrewd and calculating man, might trade a few lower-quality stones for food, water, and information about the route ahead. It is here that you begin to understand the stone's true value. Merchants from Persia, India, and the Levant all clamor for it, their eyes showing a mixture of desire and awe. Historians still debate the exact routes the lapis traveled. Some suggest secret paths, jealously guarded by powerful merchant families, while others believe it was a loose, opportunistic network where stones might change hands a dozen times, their price increasing with each exchange before they ever smelled sea air. It makes modern electronic supply chains look simple and transparent by comparison. After months of travel, your caravan finally reaches a bustling port city on the Mediterranean, perhaps Antioch or Alexandria. Here, the stones are sold to the true masters of long-distance trade, the Venetians. You watch as a Venetian merchant, dressed in fine silks, inspects your caravan's treasure. He holds a piece of lapis to the light, his expert eye judging the depth of the blue and the amount of pyrite within. Satisfied, he agrees to a price that could purchase a small fleet of ships. And as he directs his men to load the precious cargo, you hear him call it by the name that will become legendary, Ultramarinus, a Latin word meaning simply "from beyond the sea." The name itself is a short story, a poem of its own epic journey. The final leg of the journey is by water, across the deep blue Mediterranean, the very sea that gave the stone its name. You arrive in Venice, a magnificent, impossible city, built on water, thrumming with the energy of the Renaissance. The contrast with the stark, silent mountains of Afghanistan is overwhelming. Here, color is everywhere, in the Murano glass, in the sumptuous fabrics, and in the paintings that are beginning to adorn the city's churches and palaces. Your blue stone, which began its journey in a cold, dark mine thousands of miles and many months ago, has reached its destination. Here, its journey as a stone will end, and its new life, as the most revered and sought-after color of the Renaissance, is about to begin.
The vibrant, chaotic energy of the Venetian port dissolves behind you as you follow the precious blue stone through a maze of narrow alleys and arched bridges. At last, you reach a quieter quarter, a place of artisans and craftsmen. Your destination is a bottega, the workshop of a master painter. The moment you step inside, the sensory landscape changes completely. The salt-laced smell of the lagoon is replaced by the complex, intoxicating scent of linseed oil, turpentine, sawdust, and a faint, dusty sweetness from dozens of powdered pigments stored in small earthenware jars. Soft light filters down from a high window, illuminating a scene of quiet, focused creation. Apprentices, some as young as 10, are busy at their tasks. One is grinding a reddish-brown pigment on a thick stone slab. Another carefully prepares a large wooden panel, coating it in smooth white layers of gesso. Sketches and studies are pinned to the walls. Disembodied hands,
the folds of drapery, the anatomy of a horse. At the center of the room is the master, his robes splattered with paint, contemplating the gessoed panel with an intensity that seems to hum in the quiet air. Your block of lapis lazuli, so long traveled and dearly bought, is brought before him. He examines it not with the greedy eye of a merchant, but with the severe yet loving gaze of a creator. He selects the finest piece, the one with the deepest, most uniform blue and the fewest impurities. Then, he passes it to his most senior apprentice for a process that feels more like alchemy. You watch, captivated, as the apprentice begins the painstaking work of transforming this hard stone into an ultra-fine powder. He doesn't simply grind it. First, the stone is broken into small chips, then crushed into a coarse powder. But this powder is full of impurities. The gray calcite and the glittering, fool's gold pyrite you saw in the raw stone. If used at this stage, the paint would be a dull, lifeless gray. Now, the true magic begins. The apprentice mixes the powdered stone with melted beeswax, pine resin, and a little oil, forming a thick, pliable mass. It looks like a strange dough from some mystical baking show, where the grand prize is a pinch of blue dust. The apprentice gently kneads this dough in a bowl of water treated with a weak lye solution. The motion is slow and repetitive. After a time, the water in the bowl begins to turn a beautiful, pale blue as the purest particles of lapis lazuli separate from the wax and sink to the bottom. The impurities, being heavier or more attracted to the wax, remain trapped in the dough. He pours off the water into a separate vessel and repeats the process, each time extracting a slightly lower grade of blue. The first extraction is grade A, pure ultramarine, reserved for the most important commissions. The last washes might yield only a pale ultramarine ash, used for less critical details. The master painter treats the shimmering blue powder from that first extraction as if it were a holy relic, and with good reason. This powder is now worth more than its weight in gold. You learn that in contracts between painters and their wealthy patrons, the church, trade guilds, or powerful banking families, the price of ultramarine was often listed as a separate line item. The patron paid for the color, in addition to the artist's fee. It was like commissioning a grand building and having to pay for the imported Italian marble separately from the architect's labor. Ultramarine was that marble. To spill a pot of this was not just a clumsy mistake, it was a financial and spiritual catastrophe, the Renaissance equivalent of accidentally wiping a company's entire server. And now you understand what it was all for. The master is finishing a large altarpiece of the Madonna and Child. He has already completed most of the scene, the gentle landscape, the other figures, the surrounding architecture. For the sky, he has used a cheaper blue, azurite, which, while lovely, lacks the depth and luminosity of what he now holds. He takes a tiny amount of the precious ultramarine powder and binds it with egg yolk to make tempera paint. Then, in a moment of quiet reverence, he begins to paint the Virgin Mary's robe. Every brushstroke is precise, economical, and full of devotion. The color as it appears on the panel is breathtaking. It does not simply sit on the surface. It seems to glow from within, possessing a depth that makes every other color in the painting look flat and mundane by comparison. Art historians still debate the exact significance of using ultramarine for skies versus the robes of holy figures. But watching the master at work, you have no doubt. For him,
There is no debate. To use the most expensive color in the workshop was not a technical choice, but an act of pure devotion. He was clothing the Mother of God in the color from beyond the sea, the color of the heavens, at the cost of a fortune. It is a prayer made visible, a symbol of faith, rendered in stone, wax, and light.
The sacred golden light of the Renaissance workshop begins to fade. The image of the master painter, carefully brushing an impossibly expensive layer of blue onto the Virgin Mary's robes, seems to freeze, and then dims like a dying ember. For 300 years after that moment, almost nothing changed. Ultramarine, the gift from beyond the sea, remained the uncrowned king of pigments. Its value was still pegged to the price of gold, its supply chain still beginning in the treacherous mountains of Afghanistan. It was the color of kings, of the church, of the very wealthy. For the rest of the world, it was only a distant dream. But the world was changing. The solemn quiet of the artist's studio was being drowned out by new sounds. The roar of the furnace, the hiss of steam, and the relentless rhythm of the machine. You find yourself in a different world now, a world of brick, iron, and coal smoke. It is the early 19th century. Science, not tradition, is the new god, and its high priests are the chemists. They believe that any of nature's secrets can be unlocked, analyzed, and recreated in the laboratory. And one of the greatest remaining secrets was the precise chemical makeup of lapis lazuli. To create ultramarine from common materials would not just be a scientific triumph, it would be an act of democratizing the color of the sky. The story begins, as it so often does, not with a flash of genius, but with a fortunate accident. You are in France, at a factory that produces soda ash, a key ingredient for soap and glass. You watch as a worker named Tossart is cleaning one of the large kilns. As he scrapes the residue from the furnace walls, he notices something odd. Among the gray ash and soot are strange deposits of a beautiful, deep blue, glassy substance. He doesn't know what it is, but he knows it is unusual. He reports it to his superiors. That accidental blue residue, a forgotten byproduct of an industrial process, becomes the crucial clue. It proves that a substance chemically similar to ultramarine could be made from a mixture of common things like clay, soda, and sulfur when heated to extreme temperatures. News of this discovery ignites the passions of the scientific community. In 1824, France's prestigious Society for the Encouragement of Industry officially offers a prize of 6,000 francs, a fortune at the time, to the first person who could invent an affordable synthetic ultramarine for the market. This was the X Prize of the 19th century art world, a grand race to replicate a mountain's 6,000-year-old secret in a laboratory flask. The race begins. You can feel the excitement ripple across Europe. You peek into the workshops of chemists in Paris, in Tübingen, and in cities across the continent. These labs are like miniature volcanoes, filled with the sharp smell of burning sulfur and strange chemicals. Men in ash-stained aprons are carefully mixing powders, firing them in crucibles, and waiting with bated breath for the results. You witness countless failures, a gray sludge, a pale green, a disappointing black, Each failure is discarded, a new recipe is tried, and the furnace is heated even hotter. The race eventually narrows to two brilliant chemists. In Germany, there is Christian Gmelin, a meticulous and respected professor. In France, there is Jean-Baptiste Gummet, an industrial chemist from Toulouse. Both, working from the same initial clues, are closing in on the answer. You can feel the tension and intellectual rivalry that transcends national borders. They are both on the verge of capturing that heavenly blue once brought from halfway across the world. And then a heist occurs. In 1826, Gummet, in his small factory, solves the puzzle. He creates a batch of synthetic ultramarine that is chemically identical to the natural pigment and just as beautiful. But he makes a clever move. He does not publish. He does not announce his findings. He quietly files a patent and begins scaling up production, operating in complete stealth mode, much like a modern tech startup. 2 years later, in 1828, Gmelin, unaware of Gummet's secret success, publishes his own method and officially claims the prize. He won the public glory, but Gummet, with his 2-year head start, won the commercial war. He flooded the market with his affordable French ultramarine. Chemical historians still debate whether Gummet truly developed his process independently. Some suggest that with Tassart's initial discovery being public, both Gmelin and Gummet may have simply arrived at the same conclusion at the same time. A classic case of multiple discovery in science. But whatever the timing, the result was the same. The world had changed forever. Suddenly, the color of the Virgin Mary's robes, a pigment once more expensive than gold, was available to anyone. It was cheaper than a good bottle of wine. A 6,000-year monopoly held by a remote mountain valley was broken in a smoky French laboratory. Artists no longer needed a wealthy patron to paint with the color of the heavens. House painters could use the color of kings on a bedroom wall. The blue that was once sacred, precious, and unattainable had become the color of the people. The age of rare, natural pigments, with their epic journeys and mystical reverence, was ending in a haze of sulfur and fire, and a new age of brilliant, synthetic, and democratic color was dawning.
The sharp scent of sulfur and coal from the 19th century laboratory fades away, leaving a quiet space filled only with the echo of your own thoughts. The great race for blue is over. A secret held by mountains for millennia was unlocked in a crucible, and with a puff of chemical smoke, the age of unattainable colors had ended. The magic was decoded, the price collapsed, and pigment paradise was now within everyone's reach. But to find that old magic again, that feeling that a color could be truly precious, born from a rare and mysterious source, we must leave the future behind. We must travel back before the age of synthesis and begin a journey to a continent not yet haunted by the desires of the old world. The air here is warm, thick, and humid, carrying the sweet scent of damp earth, tropical blossoms, and the faint smell of cooking fires in the distance. You are standing in the heart of another mighty empire, one built not of marble, but of volcanic stone, wood,
and a deep understanding of the water that surrounds it. Before you is a causeway leading to the magnificent city of Tenochtitlan, the capital of the Aztec Empire. It rises from the center of a vast lake like a dream, a Venice of the New World, with grand pyramids instead of cathedrals and canoes gliding silently through canals instead of gondolas. You wander into the Tlatelolco market, a city within the city, and your senses are overwhelmed. The vibrancy here is beyond anything you have ever seen. There is the brilliant green of jade, the shimmering blue of ceremonial masks, and the iridescent feathers of tropical birds woven into cloaks and headdresses. But amidst this wondrous rainbow, one color holds your gaze: red. A red so deep it seems to pulse with life. It is the red of arterial blood, of a hibiscus in full bloom, of a perfect ruby. You see it on the cotton cloaks of Aztec nobles, on the ceremonial garments of priests, and in the painted manuscripts of scribes. Clearly, this is a color of immense importance. Fascinated, you resolve to find its source. This is not a mineral red like the ochre of the old world, nor is it a fleeting dye made from flowers. Your search leads you out of the city to the farmlands that feed the empire. Here you find strange fields, planted not with corn or beans, but with neat, orderly rows of nopal cactus. And on the thick, flat pads of the cactus, you see something peculiar. They are covered in fluffy white patches that look like mold, like tiny tufts of cotton clinging to the spines. You watch a farmer, a woman with surprisingly gentle hands, move along the rows. She uses a small, stiff brush made of deer hair to gently sweep these fluffy tufts into a clay pot. The work is slow and delicate, and then you realize it is not mold or fungus, it is insects. You are standing in the middle of a farm of Dactylopius caucus, the cochineal, a tiny scale insect that lives its entire life on the nopal cactus, feeding on its juices. This is the height of organic, free-range dye production, though the bugs themselves, contentedly feasting one moment and being swept into a pot the next, might disagree on the free part. A local guide, a lively merchant, explains to you the value of this living paint. He tells you how bags of dried cochineal were a form of tribute, a tax collected by the Aztec emperor from conquered provinces. He speaks of the great treasury of Montezuma, filled not just with gold, jade, and feathers, but with thousands of hand-woven bags of dried cochineal. This was the Aztec Empire's version of Fort Knox, only much crunchier. Their value was astonishing. A single bag of dried cochineal could be traded for enough corn to feed a person for life. Later, in a dyer's workshop, you witness the transformation. The farmer brings the pod of insects, now dried in the sun, where they look like tiny grayish seeds. A dyer takes a handful and grinds them with a pestle on a stone slab. They crumble into a gray-purple powder. There is no hint of the brilliant red you saw in the market. But then, the dyer adds a little water. As soon as the liquid touches the powder, it erupts into an astonishingly brilliant red. It is chemical magic. The bodies of these insects are filled with carminic acid, a powerful natural defense compound that creates this extraordinary color. To learn that the world's most beautiful red comes from crushed bugs is a bit like finding out what really goes into your favorite sausage. Perhaps it's best not to think about it too much and just enjoy the magnificent result. Historians and archaeologists still debate whether Europeans had any insect dye of comparable quality before they arrived in the New World. The Old World had its own scale insects, like the kermes from the Mediterranean, which produced a passable red. But kermes was weak, requiring a huge number of insects to produce a faint shade. The cochineal from the New World was a revolution. Its color was 10 times stronger, purer, and more permanent. To the Aztecs, it was a gift from the gods. And soon, as the ocean-faring ships arrived, it would become the New World's most valuable export after silver, igniting a new global fever for the color of blood.
The image of that pure, vibrant crimson, born from insects sipping cactus nectar under the Aztec sun, is a warm and brilliant one. It is a red of incredible power, yet it is fundamentally natural, wholesome, and clean. However, long before the treasure fleets of the Old World crossed the ocean with news of this red miracle, the quest for the perfect, brilliant red had already led them down a much darker and more dangerous path. Not to sun-drenched plantations, but deep within the earth, to a stone said to bleed from dragons, a stone that whispered promises of immortality, of wealth, and of madness. Your senses shift again. The damp sweetness of Mexico is gone, replaced by a damp cold that seeps into your very bones. You are deep underground in a dark and oppressive mine. The only light comes from a flickering oil lamp, casting long, dancing shadows on the wet rock walls. The air is stagnant, heavy with the smell of metal. This is one of the ancient cinnabar mines of Almaden in Spain, worked for centuries by the Romans. The men working beside you are not farmers, but slaves, convicted criminals and prisoners of war. Their faces are gaunt, their bodies racked with a strange tremor, and their eyes are haunted and distant. They are mining for red, and they are paying for it with their health, their sanity, and their lives. You watch as a miner strikes a vein with his pickaxe. Embedded in the rock is a seam of a remarkable mineral. It is a heavy, crystalline ore of the most brilliant, dazzling red you have ever seen. It is like a fragment of solidified fire or a drop of dragon's blood cooled millennia ago. This is cinnabar, the ore of mercury. You pick up a loose piece. It is surprisingly heavy, dense, and cool to the touch. It feels dangerous, intense, as if holding a compressed and toxic energy. This was the source of the ultimate red of the Old World, vermilion, and the process of creating it was a blend of alchemy and peril. You are now in a workshop on the surface, but the air is no less dangerous than in the mine below. You watch as an artisan, an alchemist really, places the cinnabar ore into a furnace. As the stone is heated, a transformation occurs. The mercury trapped within the rock
turns into a silvery vapor. This vapor is carefully channeled and cooled, condensing into the mesmerizing, terrifying liquid metal the Romans called argentum vivum, or living silver, or quicksilver. But the process is not over. To create the purest vermilion, the liquid mercury is combined with raw sulfur, another elemental pillar of the alchemical world, and heated again in a sealed clay pot. You see the pot glowing in the furnace. Inside, the mercury and sulfur are fusing, sublimating, and recrystallizing as a pure artificial cinnabar. When the pot cools and is broken open, the result is a substance of fiery red. This is then painstakingly ground into a fine powder. The final pigment is vermilion, a red so brilliant and stable it seems to glow from within. Its beauty was absolute, and so was its toxicity. The main safety precautions in an ancient vermilion workshop were essentially try not to breathe too deeply and hope for the best. This was not a profession with a generous retirement plan. Despite its dangers, or perhaps partly because of them, vermilion was revered. The Roman author Pliny the Elder wrote of the Almaden mines and the great value of cinnabar, noting that its price was fixed by law in Rome to keep it from becoming impossibly expensive. It was the color of triumph and ceremony, used to paint the faces of victorious generals and the statues of the god Jupiter. You see its fiery glow on the walls of villas in Pompeii, frozen in time by volcanic ash. You see it illuminating the holy words of medieval manuscripts, a slash of divine fire on the page. In China, it was the color of luck and prosperity, used in magnificent lacquerware. It was the beautiful but deadly Swiss Army knife of the pigment world. Historians and scientists still debate how well ancient artisans understood the dangers of mercury. Some suggest the debilitating symptoms of mercury poisoning, the tremors, the loss of teeth, the mental decay, were simply seen as unexplainable risks of the trade. Others believe there was a dim, mystical awareness of the mineral's toxic spirit, that the danger was part of its magical power. For the alchemists, taming mercury and sulfur was a step towards the great work, the magnum opus, a glimpse into the secret of transmutation that might lead to the Philosopher's Stone. Vermilion was the color that existed between science and superstition, between beauty and poison. It was the femme fatale of the pigment world. Irresistible, enchanting, and almost certainly fatal.
The toxic brilliance of vermilion red begins to dim, its dangerous energy fading away. The stone walls of the alchemist's workshop dissolve, and you are once again pulled through the currents of time, landing squarely in the middle of the 19th century. The air is thick with the acrid sweet smell of what was called progress, coal smoke, horse manure, and a strange, almost pleasant chemical scent you can't quite place. You are in the elegant drawing room of a fashionable London townhouse. The Industrial Revolution is at its peak, and the newly wealthy middle class, made rich by factories and trade, is eager to display its prosperity. And the most fashionable way to do that is with color.
Thanks to the recent explosion in industrial chemistry, vibrant colors are now cheaper and more accessible than ever before. But one color in particular has captured the Victorian imagination: a brilliant, vibrant, and almost glowing green. It is the color of new spring leaves, of emeralds, of absinthe, and it is everywhere. You see it in the elaborate floral patterns covering the wallpaper, in the heavy velvet of the curtains, on the dyed green ostrich feathers perched on a lady's hat, and even in the pale green icing of the cakes sitting on fine china plates. It is the signature color of an era, a symbol of nature, life, and modern sophistication. This magnificent color was called Scheele's green, named after the Swedish chemist who invented it in the late 18th century. It was a marvel of modern chemistry, a pigment far brighter and more durable than the plant-based greens that came before it. And the key ingredient to its almost supernatural vibrancy was arsenic. You watch the family in the drawing room as they go about their evening. The children play on the soft green rug, their hands and knees constantly scuffing its fibers. The lady of the house adjusts a green flower in her hair, her fingers touching the dyed fabric. The master of the house sits reading his newspaper under a green glass lampshade, the warmth from the lamp gently heating the pigment. They are surrounded by beauty, by the height of fashion, but they are in fact living inside a beautifully decorated gas chamber. They just don't know it yet. The problem with Scheele's green, and its later, more popular variant, Paris green, was that the arsenic within it was chemically unstable. The pigment was highly friable, which means it could easily crumble into a superfine dust. Every time a child slid across the carpet, every time a draft stirred the curtains, a little invisible cloud of arsenic dust was released into the air, settling on furniture, on food, and drawn directly into the family's lungs. Even worse, in England's damp climate, a common household mold loved to grow on the wallpaper paste. As the mold consumed the paste, it metabolized the arsenic in the green pigment, converting it into an extremely toxic and volatile gas called arsine. The family was literally breathing their own walls. You hear the children's cough, a dry, persistent hack that the family doctor dismisses as a common cold. You see the lady of the house complaining of headaches and nausea. The master has a rash on his hands. These are all classic symptoms of chronic arsenic poisoning, but no one makes the connection. How could they? The very source of their suffering was the symbol of their success and good taste. It would be like discovering that your organic kale smoothie was secretly killing you. The most famous and perhaps most controversial victim of this fashionable poison may have been Napoleon Bonaparte himself. After his final defeat, he was exiled to the damp, remote island of St. Helena. He spent his last years in a house that was documented as having brilliant green wallpaper. When his body was exhumed years later, analysis of his hair showed extremely high levels of arsenic. Historians still fiercely debate the cause of his death. Was he deliberately poisoned by his British captors? Or was he history's most famous victim of interior design, slowly poisoned by the very walls of his prison home? The evidence is circumstantial, leaving a fascinating historical mystery. Back in the London drawing room, a small detail that no one else notices catches your eye. A common housefly, buzzing lazily through the air, lands on the brilliant green wallpaper. It takes a few steps, cleans its legs, and then suddenly convulses and drops dead to the floor. That green was so potent that it was also widely sold as a rat and insect killer. Farmers mixed Paris green with water to spray on their crops, and people bought arsenic-laced fly papers to hang in their kitchens. The irony is staggering. People would willingly buy a product to kill pests, not realizing they had voluntarily covered their entire living space with the very same poison, simply because it was beautiful. The mortal threat wasn't coming from the outside, it was part of the furniture. The acrid, chemical sweetness of the Victorian drawing room fades away, taking the shadow of Shields green with it. You take a deep, cleansing breath, relieved to be free of that beautiful, deadly wallpaper. Even in the 19th century, an age of bold chemical discovery and staunch industrial belief, some colors still held onto their mystique. Some pigments arrived in Europe from distant lands, shrouded in rumor and legend, their true origins a complete mystery. And none was more mysterious nor more sought after for its special qualities than a magical, luminous yellow. You find yourself in the London studio of a famous painter. The year is around 1840. The air smells of oil paint and turpentine. The artist, let's imagine him as the master of light, J.M.W. Turner, is preparing his palette. He opens a small wooden box, and inside are lumpy, rough-looking balls of an opaque yellow pigment. They are surprisingly light and give off a faint animalic smell, like a barnyard, with a hint of ammonia. In the raw form, they are unimpressive, but you watch as he takes a piece, grinds it into a powder, and mixes it with linseed oil. And in that moment, the magic happens. The color that emerges is a breathtakingly warm and transparent yellow. It is not a flat, opaque yellow. It seems to glow from within, creating a golden, sun-drenched halo that no other pigment could replicate. It was Indian yellow, a pigment treasured by the greatest artists of the era, yet its origin was a puzzle that confounded Europe for a century. Your curiosity is piqued. This is an investigation now. You ask the pigment seller where it comes from. He shrugs, suggesting it's a special type of clay called gogeli from a village in India. You ask another, who whispers that it's made from the dried bile of camels or snakes. The mystery only deepens its allure. So you set out, making the long sea voyage from the gray skies of London to the sweltering heat and colorful chaos of India. Your journey takes you to a rural part of Bengal, to the district of Mungir, the rumored single source of this pigment in the entire world. Here, in a small village, you finally discover the truth, and it is stranger than any rumor. There is no special mine, no secret chemical process. The source of the world's most luminous yellow is a small herd of cows. You see them tied up in a dusty enclosure, and two things are immediately apparent. First, they are shockingly thin, their ribs showing, their eyes listless and somewhat jaundiced. And second, the ground around them is stained a brilliant, vivid yellow. A family of Gwalas, the local cowherds and milkmen, are reluctant at first, but eventually they reveal their bizarre family secret. These cows, they explain, are fed a very specific and incredibly unhealthy diet. Only mango leaves and water. The mango leaves contain a metabolite that, in large quantities, becomes a mild toxin, inducing a state of slight chronic liver distress. As a result, their urine turns a brilliant, almost fluorescent yellow. This process takes the concept of artisanal to a whole new level. You certainly wouldn't see this production method featured in any lifestyle magazine. You watch the process, both fascinated and horrified. The bright yellow urine is collected in clay pots and then gently heated over a low fire until the yellow pigment settles at the bottom. The resulting sludge is filtered through a cloth, pressed into rough balls by hand, and then dried over a fire and in the hot sun. These are the same smelly, raw lumps you saw in the London studio. The entire process is ethically dubious and biologically bizarre. It was like an internet conspiracy theory, the kind involving secret ingredients and strange animal byproducts. Except this time, it was all true. For decades, this story was only a rumor in European art circles. It wasn't until the late 1880s that Joseph Hooker, the distinguished director of Kew Gardens in London, launched an official investigation. He sent a correspondent to Monckied, who confirmed the entire story, documenting the poor health of the cows and the secrecy surrounding the production. The report caused a public outcry, and eventually, the practice of feeding cows a diet of only mango leaves was outlawed in the early 20th century on grounds of animal cruelty. And just like that, true Indian yellow, the color of captured light, became a lost pigment. Art historians and conservators still debate whether European artists of the time knew or cared about the disturbing origin of their favorite color. Perhaps for men like Turner, the mystique was part of the magic, and they were content to look the other way so long as those strange yellow balls kept arriving from the east, allowing them to paint light in a way no one ever had before. So, the next time you stand before one of his brilliant, magnificent landscapes, take a moment to remember, you may be looking at a masterpiece of fine art that is the beautiful but very specific result of a bovine health crisis induced by mangoes.
The strange luminous glow of Indian yellow fades from your mind, leaving a fresh appreciation for the bizarre lengths people once went to for a unique color. But behind every legendary pigment with an epic, ocean-spanning story were dozens of other colors that formed the backbone of commerce and fashion. These were the workhorse colors, the deep crimsons, the stable blues, the rich blacks, and their complex recipes were not mysteries of nature, but industrial secrets guarded as jealously as any treasure. To protect those secrets, craftsmen organized themselves into powerful and clandestine brotherhoods. You find yourself in another city, another time. Perhaps it is 15th century Florence or medieval Ghent. You are in the dyer's quarter. You know this because the cobblestone gutters run with faint multicolored wastewater, and the air is thick with scents, the earthy smell of boiling madder root for red, the sharp tang of fermenting woad leaves for blue,
and the metallic taste of alum, the mordant that helped the dyes cling fast to the fibers. Racks heavy with freshly dyed wool in every imaginable hue, dry in the sun, a vibrant testament to the wealth and power concentrated in this small corner of the city. Tonight, you are no longer an observer. You are an initiate. You are led into the guild hall, a heavy timber-framed building, its doors forbidden to all outsiders. Inside, by flickering torchlight, you stand before the master of the Dyers Guild. He speaks in a low, grave voice, explaining that the recipes you are about to be entrusted with are the lifeblood of the city. To reveal them to an outsider would not just be a betrayal of the guild, but of your home itself. You place your hand on a thick, leather-bound volume, the guild's Book of Secrets, and swear an oath of absolute silence. It feels like being inducted into a dangerous artisanal fight club. The first rule is, you do not talk about the crimson recipe. Now, as a brother of the guild, you are let in on the secrets, and you quickly learn that dyeing is about far more than just boiling a plant. The master shows you a page on creating the color black. You might think black is simple, but achieving a truly deep, rich, lasting black was one of the most difficult and expensive feats of all. A cheap black, he explained, would fade to a rusty brown or a dull gray within months. But the guild's black, their black, was famous across Europe. It was a complex multi-step process using tannins from crushed oak galls, a mordant of iron salts, and a final immersion in a vat of woad or indigo to achieve its profound, almost bottomless depth. It was this secret that made the black robes of Florentine bankers and Venetian nobles a symbol of sober, stable wealth. He turns another page, detailing the famous Venetian scarlet. Everyone knew it came from the insect kermes, but the guild's recipe involved precise temperatures, special additives known only to the masters, and a process that took weeks. The book you swore on is more jealously guarded than a dragon's hoard, and its recipes are, arguably, more valuable than gold. But where there is great value, there is great risk. The master explains your first task as a new member. It is not to die, but to watch. You must watch the other apprentices, the journeymen, even the masters. You must listen for careless words in the tavern, for rival city-states and ambitious foreign merchants are always trying to steal these secrets. They send spies to pose as apprentices, working for years to gain trust while memorizing every step of a process. They try to bribe journeymen with gold. These 15th century color spies were the corporate hackers of their day, trying to steal the secret source code that ran the city's economy. Economic historians still debate whether these guilds were engines of innovation, encouraging members to perfect their recipes to compete with other cities, or if they were anti-competitive barriers, deliberately suppressing the spread of knowledge and keeping prices artificially high for centuries. But standing here in the guild hall, it feels like both. The secrecy creates a powerful sense of community and pride, but it also breeds a world of suspicion, where every new face is a potential threat, and every innocent-seeming question could be a plot to extract a secret. Your job is to be the guild's first line of defense, guarding the fragile line between your city's prosperity and the wave of industrial espionage that could bring it all crashing down. You look at the bubbling vats, the racks of brilliant wool, and you understand that you are now a guardian of the colors themselves. You leave the quiet, candle-lit hall of the Dyers Guild, carrying with you the heavy air of centuries-old secrets. Their entire lives were dedicated to protecting a complex and fragile body of knowledge, passed down from one generation to the next. They were the guardians of a world where color was rare, expensive, and difficult to create. And now, you are about to watch that entire world, its oaths, its generational secrets, be rendered completely obsolete by an 18-year-old boy experimenting in a makeshift lab during his school holidays. The scene shifts. You are in mid-19th century London. The air is thick with the smog of the Industrial Revolution. And the hero of this new age of color is not a beautiful flower, a rare insect, or a mystical stone. It is coal tar, the black, smelly, sticky industrial waste left over from producing coke and the gas used to light the city's streets. It was an industrial nuisance that factories paid to have hauled away. It was the sludge at the bottom of the industrial barrel. You find yourself in the attic laboratory of William Henry Perkin, a teenage chemistry prodigy with a brilliant mind and a passion for tinkering. The year is 1856, and Perkin is home for the Easter holidays. But he isn't resting. He has set himself a goal that is both audacious and noble: to synthesize quinine, the only effective treatment for malaria, a global scourge that could only be extracted from the bark of a South American tree. Creating artificial quinine from a cheap, abundant material like coal tar would save millions of lives and make him a hero. You watch as he meticulously conducts his experiment, mixing chemicals derived from coal tar, heating them, trying to force them into the complex structure of quinine. The experiment is a complete failure. All that remains is a flask of sludgy, black-red liquid, a mess. Most chemists would have cursed their luck, thrown the gunk away, and started over. But Perkin was curious. As he tried to clean the flask with alcohol, he noticed something strange. The sludge didn't just wash away, it dissolved into the alcohol, creating a brilliant, intense, and beautiful purple solution. In that moment of cleaning up a failed experiment, Perkin had accidentally achieved something far more revolutionary than synthesizing quinine. He had created the world's first synthetic organic dye. It was one of the most important scientific failures in history. He did not create a new cure for malaria, but he inadvertently cured the world of drab, dull clothing. Unlike many scientists, Perkin immediately recognized the commercial potential of his discovery. He patented the new dye, first calling it Aniline purple, and then, with a stroke of marketing genius, renaming it mauve, after the French word for the mallow flower, giving it an air of exotic fashion. He abandoned his academic career, borrowed money from his father, and opened a factory. And the world went wild for it. A mauve mania swept across Europe. The color was new, exciting, and most importantly, cheap. For the first time, a brilliant purple,
one that looked almost identical to the ancient and imperial Tyrian purple, was available to the middle class. When Queen Victoria herself wore a mauve silk gown to the 1862 Royal Exhibition, its fame was sealed. Perkins' invention didn't just create a fashion trend, it kicked open the door to a wonderland of chemistry. Chemists all over Europe suddenly realized that foul black coal tar was a molecular treasure chest, a literal gold mine of new colors. A color rush began. It was the chemists' gold rush, but instead of panning for gold in rivers, they were prospecting through industrial waste in their labs. And the discoveries came thick and fast. The brilliant red, fuchsine, was synthesized in 1858. Then came aniline yellow, aniline green, Bismarck brown, and a host of new blues and violets. The colors that poured out of the labs in Germany and France were unlike the natural dyes that came before. They were brighter, more intense, almost jarring to an eye accustomed to the subtler, muted tones of nature. Fashion and social historians still debate the aesthetic impact of the aniline revolution. Some see it as the democratization of beauty. For the first time, color was truly available to the masses. But others mourn the loss of the subtle, complex natural tones, replaced by what they saw as cheap, gaudy, and artificial colors. Regardless of the aesthetics, the impact was irreversible. The ancient cochineal trade from the Americas, once worth a fortune, collapsed. The dyers' guilds, with their secret recipes for madder red and woad blue, couldn't compete and faded into obscurity. The entire economic and social structure, built around rare natural dyes, dissolved in less than a generation, swept away by a brilliant tide of color made from a lump of coal. The world was now a brighter, more vibrant place, and it had been changed forever.
The world is now ablaze with color. The chemical revolution you have witnessed has drenched every corner of modern life in hues previously unimaginable. The secrets of the dyers' guilds, the dangerous journeys for rare minerals, the strange biological flukes, all have been replaced by the steady, efficient output of the chemical plant. You are standing at the end of a long road, looking back at the world that was, and you can see just how far we have come. It seems like only a moment ago you were standing on a Phoenician shore, assaulted by the stench of rotting sea snails, the source of Tyrian purple. You have felt the biting cold of the Afghan mountains while carrying a single blue stone more precious than a life. You have stood in the sun-drenched market of Tenochtitlan, marveling at a crimson tribute made from the crushed bodies of insects. You have felt the dangerous heat of an alchemist's furnace, torturing a deadly red from a toxic rock. You have felt sickened by a beautiful green, arsenic-laced wallpaper in a Victorian home. You have sworn an oath in a candle-lit guild hall, pledging to protect knowledge that can now be casually printed on the back of a cereal box. And now, you have returned to your own time. You are back where we started, in a world where millions of colors can be summoned with a single click. But that world looks different now, doesn't it? The purple icon on your phone screen is no longer so simple. It carries the faint echo of a Roman emperor's cloak, a whisper of laws that held the power of life and death.
The brilliant blue of a corporate logo now carries the shadow of a Renaissance master's prayer, a pigment that once crossed an ocean. The red lipstick on a billboard has a lineage that stretches back to Aztec priests and Spanish galleons. The history is still there, written in the very DNA of each color, if you know how to look. In our modern world, color has been thoroughly tamed. We have rationalized it, standardized it. You can hold a Pantone swatch book in your hand, a fan of 1,000 shades, each with its own designated number. Living Coral 16-1546, Classic Blue 19-4052. The master of a Florentine dyer's guild would likely faint at the sight. A lifetime of work, all his guild's jealously guarded secrets, distilled, coded, and sold for a few dollars. And the quest for new color experiences hasn't stopped. We have invented pigments like Van Tablack, a substance made of carbon nanotubes that can absorb over 99.9% of visible light, creating a black so deep it looks like a hole in reality. We are still pushing the boundaries. The great struggle for color is over. We won! Or perhaps we simply changed the rules of the game. We have traded rarity for availability, mystery for chemistry, value for volume. And perhaps the historians of the future will debate our era. Will they see this endless saturation of color as the ultimate pinnacle of democratic expression, a world where beauty is available to all? Or will they see it as a loss of meaning, a world where, when everything is brilliant, nothing truly stands out? It's a question without an answer, something to ponder as you begin to drift away. For now, just appreciate the journey. Appreciate the immense human effort, the stories, the tragedies, and the triumphs hidden in every shade that surrounds you. Now, let the stories fade. Let the vibrant reds, the deep blues, and the royal purples soften at the edges, their sharp narratives dissolving into a dreamy watercolor blur. The images of emperors and artists, of miners and dyers, recede into the background, waving a gentle farewell as they drift back into the quiet pages of history. The sounds of bustling markets and hammering workshops fall silent, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. There are no more truths to learn, no more journeys to take. There is only this soft darkness, this gentle quiet. You can feel the weight of the day, the weight of these stories gently lifting from your shoulders, replaced by a pleasant heaviness in your limbs. Your mind, once filled with the colors of history, is now ready to rest, to let go of the narrative thread and float on a slow, peaceful current. Feel that current now, gently pulling you from the shore of wakefulness out into the calm ocean of sleep. Each breath is a soft wave, carrying you further out, into the stillness, into the quiet. All the colors have blended now, first into a soft gray, and then into a smooth velvet black. There is nothing left to do but let go. Nothing left to see but the darkness behind your eyelids. Nothing left to hear but the gentle hum that guides you into your dreams. Relax. Let go. Sleep now.